All right, starting to studies. As was mentioned, my name is Fatima, and I am from Atlanta, Georgia, originally. I was born and raised in Atlanta. I don't live here anymore. I was just telling Fatima about how Atlanta is such a pretty city. And where I currently live is not as pretty, not nearly as pretty. So I'm happy to be back up in the line. So today, inshallah, well, I guess like throughout this entire series, I should say, what we're going to be doing is we're going to talk about different people like in our tradition, our Islamic tradition, that face different difficulties, those difficulties that they face and how they overcame it, and possibly even go through some of like maybe du'as that they made in that time. Now, the reason why I was very inclined towards this particular, I guess, series or way is that a lot of times what happens is that when we're in college or we're in any phase of our lives, we tend to feel very alone in certain aspects of our faith, not realizing that there's many times where different stories or different situations of different people has been presented to us in our own tradition and in our own faith to teach us how to navigate life. And sure, it may not be one to one, okay? It may not equal or match up exactly, but there's always some type of principle, there's always some type of advice, or there's always some type of benefit that you can take from it. So today, inshallah, I'm going to start with one of my favorite stories. And before I start, I always like to tell people that I'm going to spend, inshallah, a good amount of time with. So this next month I'll be here, and then I think, I'm not sure about December, but most likely the words or whatever the case may be. I always like to tell people my teaching style. When I'm Halaqa, I don't have to because it's like, okay, I'm never going to see anybody ever again. But like, if it's consistent, I like to tell my teaching style. So I am a very chill teacher, at least for like classes like this or sessions like this. If you ever have questions like in between, I am more than happy to answer those questions in between. If I ask a question, it's normally not rhetorical. I would say 100% of the time it's not a rhetorical question. So I'm expecting like a little bit of engagement. If you guys don't feel like engaging, you may be tired from classes or like, I don't know, figuring out campus and life or whatever, that's fine. I'm really used to awkward moments. Okay, I've been teaching on Zoom for like almost 2 years now. And it's just a huge door to explore moment for everybody. So I ask, how's everybody doing? Everybody's really quiet, and then I'm like, cool, we're all great, let's move on. Okay? So I'm very used to awkward moments. It would just be awkward for all of us, you know? So that is just like a little bit about my teaching style. The second thing that I like to do before I start any session is that I find it extremely imperative and important that people who are in situations or in positions of learning and people who are in positions of teaching to detail their credentials. Not in the sense of bragging or in the sense of telling you like, well, this is what I've done, this is who I am, but more so that this is dealing with your spirituality and your relationship between God. Therefore, it's very important for you guys to know who I've learned from. And just in case you don't like something I say, you can know exactly which teachers you need to go look up online and tell them, hey, your girl's out of place, okay? And I've never had that complaint about me, alhamdulillah, and I don't plan on starting that now this early in my life, so, or ever, so inshallah, hopefully that never happens. But I was expressing to Hadia earlier as well, and talking about that I studied here. I did my secular education at Keystone State University. I have a bachelor's and a minor, a bachelor's in psychology and a minor in religion. And then I went off to Dallas, Texas, where I spent essentially 6 years of my life studying Islamic Studies at Golden Institute. Underneath some scholars named Shimon Nasser, Hussein Fadi, so on and so forth. Like, just people, honestly, Golden, and they will all show up. There I spent 5 years studying just a regular, normal Islamic Studies curriculum. Then went on to spend the last 4 years of my life, or 3 years of my life, specializing in self. One day, maybe I'll finish being a student, as my friends like to say. But as of right now, that end does not seem like it's coming in anytime soon, inshallah. So you will find that because I have a huge interest in tafsir and in Quranic studies, a lot of my stories will come from the Quran just because it's just so powerful. And for me, I don't feel the need to tell a story that God has already told himself. And I just have to use God's words. And in using God's words, one, I make sure that you guys don't have any complaints against me because they're God's words. And two, I get to communicate what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted us to know himself. So one story that I really enjoy, especially throughout these last 2 years of difficulty and hardship and loneliness and just feeling like the whole world has been upside down, has been the story of Maryam alayhi salam. And the reason why I wanted to start off with her is because a lot of times, when we go through stories of pious people or prophets or whatever the case may be, we always start off with a typical, run. So we may start off with Adam alayhi salam, or we may start off with Musa alayhi salam, or even sometimes the Prophet alayhi salam. And not saying that those stories are anything less, but it's nice to get something a little bit different thrown into that. The second reason is because Maryam alayhi salam's story is so unique, and it teaches us so many different things that sometimes we don't spend time to pinpoint. So she's gone through a journey in her life that teaches about boundaries. It teaches about our relationship with Allah and how do we establish that relationship and how do we maintain it even when other people don't necessarily even think that we're, religious, or other people don't necessarily think that we have a place in religiosity or whatever the case may be. And then last but not least is how she had a level of trust and what we call tawakkul in Allah. Now, Maryam alayhi salam is very interesting because her life, or the trajectory of her life, started very early. And it started when she was actually in her mother's womb. Because her mother made dua to Allah, and her mom asked Allah to give her a child, meaning the child that she was carrying, and that child be someone that will be dedicated to deen, dedicated to religion, dedicated to all of that. Islam, well, at that time it was like a lot of different things, but dedicated to God. When Maryam alayhi salam's mother gave birth to her, she gave birth to a daughter. And then she was very shocked. She wasn't disappointed, but she was shocked. And she felt as though her giving birth to a daughter, because they didn't have sonograms and stuff like that back then. So she felt as though her giving birth to a daughter was actually Allah not answering her du'as. The reason being, because in that time, the people who would take care of the places of worship, the people who would take care of what were considered to be monuments of God were men. And so for her, she assumed that her dua was answered, and she assumed that she would have a boy. Now, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala corrects her understanding right then and there. When she gives birth and she says that I gave birth to a daughter, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says to her that God knows best what you gave birth to. And yes, it's true that men and women are not the same, but Allah has accepted her. Okay? Allah has accepted her with the best of acceptance. And that best of acceptance is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala then put Maryam alayhi salam in the care of Zakaria. Zakaria was a prophet. So she gets a daughter who's being raised by a prophet. And something interesting really happens in this time that she's being raised with Zakaria, that Maryam alayhi salam will have her own what's called a mihrab. She had these little corners around, Masjid al-Aqsa and Masjid al-Qibli basically in Palestine, that she would go there and she would spend her time worshiping there. Okay? You go there today, and you go on a tour, they will take you to the mihrab of Maryam. It's like this tiny little corner. And Zakaria's was tiny as well. It was like these tiny little niches inside of like the mosque, okay, underground. I don't know if any of you guys have been there before, but it's like a sight to see. It's very beautiful. It's very powerful. It's very awesome. So she would go there. So one day Zakaria alayhi salam comes to her and he says to her, Ya Maryam, ma laki hada? What is this? And the reason why is because he will find that there are fruits out of season. So for us to have mangoes in the middle of the in the middle of winter, it's not a problem because, hey, we import and export things from all over the place, all right? Or global warming is ruining everything, but that's a conversation for another day. For them, that was completely abnormal. You just had what came into season at that time. And so Maryam alayhi salam very nonchalantly and very clearly and honestly not even being sarcastic just replies to him and says to him that it came from God and God can give that which he wills and God has no limits. This was the first attest to tawakkul that she had. And it seemed like something so trivial, so small. And the reason why I start off with this particular part of her life is because we don't realize building what is called trust in God starts with the smaller things. It doesn't just magically appear. We don't just magically have this like epiphany normally when something big happens in our life. It usually starts with the little things and those little tracks that you place so that when big things or big situations do occur, you're able to fall back on that thing that you built and that trust that you built. Fast forward to many years later, Maryam alayhi salam, she used to go out away from her family, like I mentioned, and she used to spend that time there worshiping. And what she would do is that she would take a lot of distance from her family because she felt that it gave her more solace to be able to sit by herself and worship God in whatever way that she will meditate, so on and so forth. You will find too that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about this, and the Prophet also talks about how solitude is not necessarily bad. Obviously, you should make sure that you're not like being a complete loner, having friends and family and stuff around is good, but also spending time with just you and God is great. So Maryam alayhi salam would do that. One day she's away from her family, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَأَرْسَلْنَا إِلَيْهَا رُوحًا. We sent to her our spirit, meaning Jibril alayhi salam. فَتَمَثَّلَ لَهَا بَشَرًا سَوِيًّا. And he came in the form of not like some old man. He didn't come in the form of somebody who was homeless, who didn't dress well, somebody that needed help. That's not how he came. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that he came in the form of a very good looking male, someone that was well proportioned. That's literally how the Quran explains it. And so Maryam alayhi salam, knowing her boundaries and knowing the situation that she's in and knowing where she's at, because she told her family she's going off to, what is she going off to do? Worship. Very good. See, it's not hard. It's not hard questions. Everybody starts freaking out, okay? They're not hard, okay? She's going off to worship. So she's like, I am not about to be trapped in a situation. This is not happening. Okay? So she turns to him and she says to him, إِنِّي أَعُوذُ بِالرَّحْمَنِ مِنْكَ إِن كُنْتَ تَقِيًّا. That I am seeking refuge in the most merciful. And then she says that if you should leave me, like you better get away from here, if you're very truthful, like if you're a person that fears God. The reason why she says this is because she knows that her own du'as are very powerful. Sometimes we don't believe in our own dua. And when we don't believe in our own dua, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala may be opening doors for us that we've made dua for, but because we don't believe in it, we don't see that door. Sometimes we ask God for a sign. This is my favorite example. We'll do istikhara. We ask the Lord for a sign. The Lord provides a sign. You say, not that sign, another sign, Allah. No. You just ask for a sign. God clearly provided a sign for you. You have to trust in your dua and know that Allah. You have to trust in your relationship with God and know that God is answering. Because that's actually where confidence is rooted. Confidence is not necessarily rooted in oneself because we're all flawed. Confidence is rooted in our relationship between God. And so for her, she was very confident at this moment. She says to him, listen, you're claiming to be God-fearing, you're claiming all of these things, you're in my space, you better get out of here because I just sought, the Lord's help. And if his help comes down, somebody's going to be in trouble that's not only me. That is what she's telling him. Jibril alayhi salam then replies to her, and he says to her, إِنَّمَا أَنَا رَسُولُ رَبِّكِ. That I am a messenger that came from your Lord, the أَحَبَ لَكِ غُلَامًا زَكِيًّا. And I'm giving you the good news and the gift. I'm telling you that you're going to be getting a gift of a child, a very pure child. You'll find that in the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not say things that are not necessary. The Quran is not redundant. It's not unnecessary. The words, the descriptions, the way that God talks, it is all very purposeful because there's always something that someone will try to refute, and there's always something that someone will come up and try to say, and there's always a connection at the end of the story. And so the words that Jibril alayhi salam say to her are very clear. That God is giving you the gift. Literally, a gift is something that is not a burden. Okay? If someone gives you a burden as a gift, then maybe you need some new friends. All right? So literally, a gift is something that is not a burden. It's something that to bring joy, something to happiness, something to bring hearts together. That is what a hibah is. And then he says that I'm giving you the good news of a child, Ghulaman Zakiya, a pure child. And the reason why this word pure is added here is because the situation of Maryam alayhi salam that she's going to face when she's going to her community. And she has to be sure that she is confident in her relationship with God, and she's rooted in her faith. faith in order to face the backlash that she's going to end up having to face. So the conversation starts off very early. Maryam alayhi salam says something to him, and it's a way that it's a particular style that you will see in the pious people and in the prophets and how they speak. And the way that they speak, and the way that the Quran speaks, and the way that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks, and the prophets and things of that nature, is that they're very tasteful in how they say things, and they're very clear about what they're saying, but they're not tacky. It's not tacky, it's not disgusting, it's not inappropriate, it's not like late night television, basically. So Maryam alayhi salam then replies to him, and she says to him, أَنَّا يَكُونُ لِي غُلَامٌ, that you're telling me I'm going to have a child, وَلَمْ يَمْسَسْنِي بَشَرٌ وَلَمْ أَكُنْ بَغِيًّا. You're going to tell me I'm going to have a child, وَلَمْ يَمْسَسْنِي بَشَرٌ, and no male has ever touched me before in my life, وَلَمْ أَكُنْ بَغِيًّا, I don't even cross societal lines. Forget about God's boundaries. I don't cross the boundaries of people. I sit in my corner, I worship God, and that's it. Like, I don't even talk to my family like that, let alone this being a reality. And Jibril alayhi salam then responds to her, and he says, Kadalika, just like that. Because that's how it is. Allah is limitless. A lot of times what happens is that we limit God to our own understanding of people. We think to ourselves, this dua can never happen. This dua can never be answered because it makes no logical sense in the world. But guess what? Nothing has to be logical for God for it to happen. And sometimes we may think to ourselves, well, these are people of our past, and this is the Quran, and so on and so forth. So of course miracles happened then, but no miracles are coming down for me. I promise you, if you really think about your life, and you really think about the different things that occurred in your life, you'll find miracles there. They may not be as grand as an angel coming and talking to you. I hope none of you guys are experiencing angels talking to you because we got bigger things to talk about there. So they may not be as grand as angels coming down and talking to you in that way, but there are miracles that are occurring in your life. So God says to her, so Jibril alayhi salam says to her, كَذَلِكِ قَالَ رَبُّكِ هُوَ عَلَيَّ هَيِّنٌ. I always trip up with these ayats because 2 pages before is like the same exact conversation with different people. Okay? So he says that your Lord has said that this is something that is easy for him. Hayyin is it's like flowing water. Like as easy as it is, as natural as it is for water to flow, this is how easy it is for God to make this come into play. And then he says, وَلِنَجْعَلَهُ آيَةً لِلنَّاسِ, that this child is going to be made an example. He's going to be made a sign for the people. وَرَحْمَةً مِنَّا, and mercy from us, meaning from Allah. And then he says, وَكَانَ أَمْرًا مَقْدِيًا, this is something that's going to happen. Like, don't waste your energy trying to protest it. God has already decreed it, and it's a thing that's going to happen. It's set in stone, and it's going to happen. فَحَمَلَتْهُ فَانْتَبَذَتْ بِهِ مَكَانًا قَصِيًّا. So she goes through with the pregnancy. I mean, she didn't really have a choice. And she decides that she's going to now seclude herself even further away from her family because she doesn't really know how she's going to explain, what's happening. She doesn't process that far. So she secludes herself further away from her family. فَأَجَاءَهَا الْمَخَاضُ إِلَى جِذْعِ النَّخْلَةِ. The pains of labor pushed her to a date palm tree. So she sought comfort there. And she does something that we don't talk about. Okay? She does something that we don't talk about. A lot of times when you're overwhelmed, things are happening, life is stressful, things are just stressful. They're stressful, there are things happening, maybe it's school, maybe it's not, maybe it's family, maybe it's just you. Okay, sometimes we're just a problem, all right? There's just, gotta be real. Tell my siblings that all the time, you're the problem. They're like, no, actually, you're the terrorist in the house. They say that, tomato, I think it's them, they think it's me, whatever, okay? Sometimes we just have a lot going on. You go to somebody, you let them know, hey, I'm just overwhelmed, this is what's happening in life, and they're just be grateful and be patient and you'll be okay. And you're like, thanks, I understand those things, but just a little bit of words of comfort this time could have helped, or, letting me rant. Sometimes my friends call me and they're like, I don't want to hear your advice. I just want to say what I have to say. And I'm like, thank you for prefacing it like that. I will listen to you. We'll hang up, and maybe in 2 days we'll talk about it when you're ready, right? So sometimes things are so overwhelming that your emotions do get the best of you. And sometimes what happens is that when we read stories of prophets and pious people and so on and so forth, we always read the good part, the fun part, where it's like they went, they made dua, and like everything was great, and that's the end of the movie and the credits roll, right? Maryam alayhi salam does something very human in this moment that you will actually see in the stories of prophets as well. She says to Allah, she's in labor, okay? She is in labor with her first child. She does not have a husband. She does not have a family. She does not have anybody around her. She is by herself in the middle of nowhere, giving birth to a child that she's going to have to take to the city. She's going to have to go back because that's where everything is. So she is in a state of, think about vulnerable times 5,000, all right? And Maryam alayhi salam, she then calls out and she says, قالت يا ليتني مت قبل هذا وكنت نسيا منسيا. I wish I died before this moment and I was just forgotten. Like, I wish no one knew who I was, because I don't even want to have to deal with that. She says, I wish I died before this moment and I was just forgotten. You have times where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about the Prophet and the way that he felt when people will constantly not just reject the message. That wasn't the issue. That was a issue, but it wasn't the issue. The issue was them dragging people through the streets of Mecca and treating them poorly. The issue was him praying inside of the haram and them throwing feces and things on him in front of his own child. The issue was the torture that the Muslims endured for 13 plus years of their life. And the Prophet ﷺ still being someone who would cry in his salah out of just concern for the world, out of concern for people, out of concern, out of hurt. And that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, لَقَدْ جَاءَكُمْ رَسُولٌ مِّنْ أَنفُسِكُمْ حَرِيصٌ عَلَيْكُمْ مَا عَنِتُّمْ. That there's a messenger that has come to you from amongst you, and he is azizun alaykum. He is grievous about your pain that you endure. He is grievous about the hardship that will come to you. He is sad. He's taking on your burden. Like this, they were sad. When the Prophet's wife died, he was sad. The year was called the year of sorrow. If you read Sirah, it will literally be called the year of sadness. He was sad. That years later, when he would talk about her, he couldn't get through sentences, and he would say, إِنَّهَا كَانَتْ وَكَانَتْ. She just was. He was so enamored by her greatness and how she was, and he had missed her so much that when her friends would come and visit and knock on the door and do her special knock, it would bring him to tears. That he would sacrifice animals and go and give meat in charity. And he will always give in her name. They were sad. They felt emotion. There is nothing wrong with that. There is nothing wrong with feeling the emotion of the situation that you're in. There is nothing wrong with acknowledging that the hardships that you're in are hard. Musa alayhi salam, he says to Allah, Rabbi shrah li sadri, expand my chest. He was having a panic attack. His heart was beating against his chest. He asked God to expand his chest for him. It was hard. The things that they endured, the difficulties for us to be able to sit here and learn about it, they were going through real life issues. And so Maryam alayhi salam calls out at this moment. And she says, قَالَتْ يَا لَيْتَنِي مِتُّ قَبْلَ هَذَا وَكُنْتُ نَسْيًا مَنْسِيًّا. I wish I died before this moment and I was long forgotten. Like, I don't even want to have to deal with it. What does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala say to her? فَنَادَاهَا مِنْ تَحْتِهَا. That he called out to her from below. They say that there's a valley there. أَلَّا تَحْزَنِي. God says to her, don't be sad. قَدْ جَعَلَ رَبُّكِ تَحْتَكِ سَرِيًّا. And know that God has provided for you a stream, a river. وَهُزِّي إِلَيْكِ بِجِذْءِ النَّخْلَةِ. And grab onto the trunk of the date palm tree and shake it. تُسَاقِطْ عَلَيْهِ رُطُبًا جَنِيًّا. and you will find that these fresh and ripe dates will fall down. Have you guys ever seen a date palm tree before? Have you ever shook one? Is it shakeable?
No, it's not.
Right. Pretty much have, like, I would say 99.9% impossible to shake a date palm tree and dates actually fall from it. The scholars say, and it's very interesting, they say that this is teaching two things. One, miracle of God, for sure, 100%. Number two is that sometimes we want God to help us out of a situation, but we need to make a little bit of effort. You can't just sit down, in your living room and watch TV all day and say, okay, I'm going to pass on my classes. That don't happen. That don't happen. You got to do the work. Very good. You got to get up. You got to go to class. I hope you guys are going to class. Okay, even if it's just rolling over and turning on Zoom, you got to get up. You got to go to class. You got to do the work, and then you will get the outcome, right? And Allah will facilitate, help, and give you the outcome. So they say that this was also teaching us a lesson. And even sometimes when we're in situations that seem impossible, this is what patience means. It means to actually persevere. Someone needs to persevere. It means to push through that moment. It means to push through that time. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells her to grab onto this date palm tree and to shake it. And then she will get freshly ripe dates. God could have just provided them for her at the bottom of her feet. He provided a river for her. He did. It came out of nowhere. He could have just given her this. But it's teaching us a lesson of times of hardship. When we seek out and we call out to Allah, Allah is always there. Sometimes we need to make a little bit more effort to see that God is always there. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says to her, فَكُلِي وَاشْرَبِي, so eat and drink. وَقَرِّي عَيْنًا, cool your eyes, meaning stop crying. Not like being rude, okay? Allah's not telling her, like, get over it. No, He's like, listen, I got you. It's going to be okay. He says, فَإِمَّا تَرَيَنَّ مِنَ الْبَشَرِ أَحَدًا, that if you see any person, okay, فَقُولِي إِنِّي نَذَرْتُ لِلرَّحْمَنِ صَوْمًا, that what you're going to say to them is that I have taken an oath from God. Like, I'm going to not speak to anybody, okay? فَلَنْ أُكَلِّمَ الْيَوْمَ إِنسِيًّا, I'm not going to speak to any person. Just let them know that this is not happening. This is Maryam alayhi salam right until she gives birth. Okay? She gives birth to this child. She calls out for death. She's not in a very good state. The very next ayah, and what's interesting is that in the Arabic language, when a word starts off with fa, it's a transition of that normally. And that means that this happened and then this happened, like directly after. There wasn't time, it wasn't like a couple of days later, she got to sit down and think about it, and then she was like, okay, I'm okay. Sometimes you give yourself a pep talk in the shower, and you're like, you got this. Like, none of that happened for her. It was just this, boom, boom, boom. And then it says, فَأَتَتْ بِهِ قَوْمَهَا تَحْمِلُهُ. She just went straight into the scene with her child, carrying him. The confidence. You were just calling out for death like 5 seconds ago. You just wanted to be forgotten like 2 minutes ago. And now you're going straight into the city with your child, not hiding him, carrying him. Why? Because she trusted in God. She didn't know what Allah was going to do. She didn't know what God had planned. But she knew that Allah gave her a sign. And His sign was not going to take care of it. And all you have to do is just remain quiet. Someone told us, listen, everything will be great. You just have to say nothing. We're about, oh no, sorry. Can I get a redo? Can I get another one? Something else, No, Allah just tells her, just don't say anything. Just don't talk to nobody. That's it. This is your sign. So she goes to her people. قَالُوا يَا مَرْيَمْ لَقَدْ جِئْتِ شَيْئًا فَرِيًّا. They said, wow. She gets there. And they say, you did something really bad. It doesn't look good, right? We're trying to rationalize it. It doesn't look good. So they say to her, Maryam, you did something really bad. You did something horrible. And then they don't stop there because it's a community. Communities don't just stop at one thing, they keep going. So they say to her, Ya ukhta Haruna, ما كان أبوك امرأة سوء وما كانت أمك بغيا. They say to her, old sister of Harun. Now, she wasn't actually Harun and Musa alayhi's sister. She came from the descendants of prophets, so she came from their family. They brought her family lineage into it, okay? They were like, listen, you're from Harun and Musa, and this is like, you come from a family of prophets and noble people. And they say that my kana abu kimra asau, and your dad was not a bad person. You know, your mom did not do these types of things. Meaning, like, your parents raised somebody that got some sense. What is wrong with you? What is wrong with you? How can you do this? They're like, oh, your uncle, your grandfather, you're this, you're that. They didn't do these types of things. So what is wrong with you? But Asharat ilay, she just points straight to the baby. What is everybody's response? Yes. Are you crazy? It's a baby. And so they respond to her and they say, Kayfa nukallimu man kana fil mahdi sabiya. How are we supposed to talk to somebody that is still being cradled? It's not like if he was a toddler, okay, that would have even made a little bit more sense. But you pointing to a baby. Never doubt God's miracle, because then Isa alayhi salam talks. And he says, Inni abdullah, that indeed I'm the slave of Allah. Atani al-kitaba wa ja'alani nabiyya, that he gave me the book and he made me a prophet. Now, you find that this wasn't common. This is not a common miracle. Okay, Allah didn't just go around making all kinds of babies talk. Okay, there are only 4 babies in our history that we know of that spoke at when they were a child. You see that different miracles came to different people and came to different nations in a way that was obviously perfect for that time and perfect for that miracle and perfect for that situation, right? The baby speaking on behalf of Maryam alayhi salam, there was nothing that she could have said to her people to convince her otherwise. It quite literally was going to have to take a miracle, and a very convincing miracle, to get her out of this situation. Quite literally. There was no other way. What was she going to say? You know me. You know I go off and study. What's she going to say? You know I was worshiping God. They're like, oh, you were worshiping God, all right? What's she going to say? What is she going to say that's going to possibly convince them that she's not lying? Nothing. There is nothing that she could say. So the baby talking, Isa alayhi salam talking, was like pretty much the only miracle that could happen at that time to get her out of the situation. And he says many other things after this, but I'm not really going to go into it because we're not here to talk about Isa alayhi salam. That's like a story for another day. I don't even know if I want to bring him up again. You know, we'll see how I feel. I'm a very feeling person, you know. Like, this month I feel like talking about this, so we'll see. But he defends her in that moment. You'll find that in this particular story, Maryam alayhi salam was someone who was known, and the Prophet talks about her in her conviction in God. All around, she had the strong conviction and the strong trust in Allah that was unwavering, even in the moment that she called out death. Because in the moment that she called out death, did she say, I don't trust God? No. Was she mad at Allah? No. She was just not happy with the situation. And that's perfectly okay. It's perfectly fine. You know, you do not have to be happy that bad things are happening to you. You don't. You don't have to, like, if something bad, if someone, God forbid, gets into a car accident, they don't have to be, like, jollying on down the road, like, oh, look at this new blessing in disguise. It's like, no, you can be upset. It's just about having trust in Allah, is knowing that God is looking out for you. Even when things are upside down, even when things don't seem like they're going to pan out, even when things seem like your du'as are not being answered, you've been making tahajjud every day, you're praying every single day, things just are not clearing up, classes are not going well, life is just upside down. Yes, it's okay to feel those feels, but remember that you put your trust in Allah. And at the end of it, it will work out. Things will work out. There are du'as that you've made that you have no idea, okay, that you were once making it before. Sometimes a moment triggers you. You're like, man, I used to be here in prayer night every day for this thing that never happened, and thank God it didn't happen. How many du'as do we make and we're like, man, we almost held ourselves in such horrible situations. But at that moment, it felt like, God, if you don't answer this, like, I know you don't like me. That's how you feel, you know? You're like, I know I need this. We know a lot about ourselves, but guess who knows more? God, Allah does. Maryam in that moment may not have felt like she could face her community. She may not have felt like she had the confidence. She may not have felt like she had the wherewithal or the energy or, and honestly the ability to face her community. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told her, I'm going to. And it teaches us a lesson of going through life with God. We are to go through our life with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We don't just call upon Him when we feel like it. Yeah, He still answers because He's merciful in that way. But how much better will your life be if you have that trust in Him? How much easier would it be to navigate difficulties if you're walking your path of life with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Because Allah is there. We just have to realize it. So that is the story of Maryam alayhi salam. That is her life, not her entire life. There's a lot more that comes after that. But this is the heavy-hitting part of her tawakkul and her conviction in God. And I pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allows for all of us to have that level of conviction, to have that level of trust in Him. And I pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala helps us through our difficulties and forgives us for our shortcomings. Any questions? Yeah.
So, speaking of touching on the point that you had is you can make dua as much as you